really my pleasure to welcome Paul tonight, or this afternoon. A lot of the work that I do here at the museum involves having people look at and talk about artwork, and I work a lot with kids, but it really is a process of looking at and trying to decipher what is behind the painting. So having seen a little sneak preview of Paul's slideshow today, I'm excited to see kind of the inverse of that, where you see how a painting is built. Paul did do a demo here at the museum and was quite brave about it. I know a lot of artists who will take the work and kind of pre-prepare what they're doing, but Paul actually did a demo where he was working very intuitively and very hands first, and I would say intuition first. So he's done a wide variety of work here at the museum. I am delighted to present Paul, and please relax, enjoy yourselves. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A afterward, but I really encourage you to take that out into the bistro and talk to Paul and talk to each other during the reception afterward as well. So welcome. Thanks for being here. Paul Polson.
Okay, I guess I don't have to introduce myself. I find it kind of odd, being up here, especially for my upbringing. And the reason I say that is because I was born and raised in Wyoming, born in Laramie. We lived in a small town called Mountain View, Wyoming, and it had 400 people. It was in the southwest corner, and it's a little valley that kind of supports. The town kind of supported all the ranchers in the area. And so I was there up until the 8th grade, and my dad was in lumber and hardware business. I did stuff for the Forest Service and for the ranchers in the area, and he sold tractors. And so it was really quite the upbringing. And we used to run around barefoot in town in the summer, and winters, of course not. It was like 20 below zero and winds and really wicked weather. But we had a little bit of misfortune in that beginning of my 8th grade, Dad's business burned down. And when that happened, it was left to him by my grandfather, who left it to all 4 of his children. And when that happened, he didn't have enough to rebuild because his brothers and sisters would rather take the insurance money and divvy it up. So he went into teaching. And so he immediately was given a job. And this job was in a place called Bill, Wyoming. Well, actually, it was a suburb of Bill. Bill had a population of 1. And he actually worked at Coal Mine, Wyoming, which was really not a town, but a coal mine. And so anyway, we had an old trailer that the wind would rock back and forth, and so we lived there, me and my brother, and my sisters and my mother lived in Douglas, which was like 30 miles south of there. And so anyway, it's quite the upbringing. We'd get up in the morning and we'd go to this little white schoolhouse. It looked just like a Norman Rockwell schoolhouse in the middle of the prairie, and it had a swing and some slides and outhouse, and we would heat up the oven or the stove, and then we'd go out and we'd pick up the ranch kids and bring them back to the schoolhouse. And he just did that for the southern kids. There's another parent who went north and picked up the ranch kids from there. But anyway, Bill is really on the map, and it has the reason it is because it has a post office. And it has a general store, and it has gas, and so it's the only thing in the area that all the ranchers really have. And there's a small house in the back, and I'm just, assuming Bill lived there. But anyway, that was kind of like my upbringing. Then I went to, when Dad actually did summer school, we went to a small town called Granger, Wyoming. And it had we kind of, moved up to the, more populated areas of Granger, which had a population of 100. And so I had to go 35 miles into school every day by bus. I was beginning high school. But when I think back on it and think back on, why am I into art, other than the fact that I'd love to draw, and I was kind of unique with with all the other students in classes, and that they always like to see what I drew or what I did. So when I went to high school, there was a teacher that we had that was an art teacher that actually all she really did was crafts. She didn't really teach much art, but she knew I liked to paint, and so she ordered a whole bunch of canvas boards. And so every day I would do one painting. And after a while, teachers started buying them, and the home ec teacher bought one of them for 7 lemon meringue pies. So she'd made me one once a week. So just on Fridays, we would go there and we'd, go to the refrigerator after sports was over, before the activity bus arrived, and we would, dive into the lemon meringue pie. But I can't say that I didn't really see any art in that area, because my dad had a friend, his name was Harold Hopkinson, and he was a country and western painter. In fact, he probably passed away, I think, about 15 years ago, and he's in western museums. You can find him around, the western area, Utah and Wyoming and Colorado and stuff. And then my dad also had another friend who did nudes in Salt Lake City. And so when we'd go visit him, he might have he'd had a nude on the wall, but he also had a big studio, but I wasn't allowed to go in there. But I'd say probably the best and most art that I ever saw was at the LDS Temple Visitor Center. And that just completely awed me, because it was so well done, and it was something I could just walk around and see tons of art and tons of murals, and there were bronzes to take in and see, and it was just something that completely surprised me, because again, I was kind of naive to art in general, and other than just liking to do it and loving to do it. And in fact, in Salt Lake, I found this book by Salvador Dali, and I think I saved up some money, like $60, to buy that book, and I just really loved it. It was a book that just occupied my time for hours on end. And if you all know Salvador Dali, you can kind of see some of my influences maybe in some of this work that I'm going to be showing you. But I've as I grew and I went to the University of Wyoming, and went into the military, and but things seemed to happen for me. They were mostly like little things like getting a job at Circus in Las Vegas doing portraits, and I started realizing that I graduated in art education, by the way, and then I realized that I really wasn't doing what a lot of artists did. A lot of when they graduated, they go, well, I have to get a job, and I have to do all this kind of stuff before I can start painting like I really want to do, or I have to get a grant, or I have to paint all these paintings to look like each other so they'll fit in a gallery and I'll be accepted into a gallery. And I have always considered myself a studio painter. And what I mean by that, everybody works in their studio, but that was my laboratory. So when I went in, that's where I played and tried things out, and did different things, and that's the reason I did painting and why I did art. And so after a while, I did end up leaving Wyoming, and I went to San Francisco, and I wanted to see the South Coast, so I went south. I really wanted to go to Seattle at the time, and so I went south, and I wanted to see the Big Sur and that area. It was beautiful. And I ran into a friend in San Diego, and I worked at the Wyoming State Hospital after I got out of the Army for 2 years. And so I learned a lot of things. I worked for an occupational therapist. And this occupational therapist was my age, and she went back east to visit her fiance once and came back with a book. And this book was Jackson Pollock's psychoanalytical drawings, and it just totally amazed me. And it's written by C.L. Weissoff, and he had a a psychoanalyst doctor that actually worked with him. His name is Joseph Henderson, and he was considered a Jungian psychologist. Jungian. And so anyway, I was going, what's Jungian? I have no idea what Jungian is. And so I started looking it up, and I started realizing that he was a contemporary of Freud, and probably had made just as big an impact as Freud made. And so he, developed a lot of the stuff about, like race consciousness, or it's kind of collective consciousness with your animus. It's like the male inside the female and the female inside the male. The fact that we have all the characteristics inside of our own bodies, and we have to really understand this other side of ourselves to really become a whole person, and not just put it over on your wife or your husband on having those expectations. Like, for instance, guys, it's okay to cry, and women, it's okay to go out and tune up your car. And so it's just, but it's something that's always inside of you, and that also makes for a better relationship. And I bring up relationships because I found that that's how I like to deal with my painting, is a relationship. So if I ever take a painting and start and force it to the end, it never meets my expectations. And if I treat it like it's another entity, or like there's a force behind the painting and something that I'm working with or sharing with or dealing with, then I found that the paintings turned out so much better. And I was always delighted about how they ended, and I always finished a painting. And so anyway, to start off with, I'm just going to give you a little idea of what I do when I start a painting. And so you're talking about Jackson Pollock. So this is how I start every painting I do. And sometimes I'll start painting on this, and I might end up not having a single thing there at the end of the painting. Everything might be completely covered, or it might be a major part of the painting, either way. But the whole idea is that when you start painting, I don't know how many painters there are in here, but if when you start a painting and you start it on a white canvas, I mean, it's kind of like, let's get rid of the white so I can really feel like I'm actually doing a painting. And so I found it a lot easier to cover the surface. And I know a lot of artists do that, and some of them just put a solid color on, but the idea of what I'm doing, and what Jung really emphasized, was that he studied dreams, and he studied dreams of people in Africa and in the American Indians, and of the businessman in New York and everybody else. And he started comparing symbols and stuff that people would have in the dreams, and he found that there was a lot of commonality in that. And he also would take religion, and he would look, instead of the differences in religion, he would compare the different things that was consistent with all religions on earth, as if it did really all come from the same place. And so when I do a painting, what I'm doing is a version of a dream. And I always thought it was important. Like, you see, my landscapes, and I've done a lot of figurative work, but to me that's a practice that I have to do to feel like I'm a legitimate artist. I mean, I was told that figures were really, really hard to do, and half of the people I went to school with said, well, I'm not going to do figures. You're going to do something else, like do something, conceptual or something, doing, like completely different. But, but my response to that was to to do just the opposite. And so starting at the University of Wyoming, I think every week I did like workshops, figure drawing workshops. And I went to San Diego, I did workshops. And so I just continually worked from the figure. And if anybody in here has worked at it with a figure drawing workshop, it's usually lasts about 3 hours, and you start with like probably 10-second poses. Sometimes it's 15-second poses, moves up to 30 seconds, moved up to a minute. And the whole idea of this is to just get a quick concept of the motion of the figure. And anybody who's drawn a figure, if you start at the head and go to the bottom, you find out that it's really stiff, and it doesn't have any feeling or emotion in it at all. But I really, doing this as much as I have, it's become a the first thing I do is I just sketch something out just as quick as I can with as much flow as I can with my hand. And it's, and actually I kind of capture the movement of what is really going on. And so anyway, there's, when Christian was talking about being in education and teaching people how to look at a painting and how to read a painting, there's a couple analogies that I kind of want to go talk to you about. And that is when I was going to school, my dad had me come back during a vacation, and I did he wanted me to teach a class. And it was in that small town of Granger, Wyoming, and there was probably 12 kids in his class. And that was 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And he was also the coach. He's also the principal. And so, the small towns. So anyway, I said, sure, I'll do that. So I went in, and that says, okay, I'm going to give you all a piece of paper. And it's all, it's 8.5 by 11. And I want all of you to just draw a horse. And so, of course, there's 2 or 3 in the class that just like, all right, because they have drawn horses before, and they just drove right in. They just loved doing it. And a few people just didn't care. They just drew a horse. And there was a couple of people off to the side that would just sit there and wouldn't even, touch the paper. And so I said, look, you got to do something. And they said, well, I can't draw. And I said, well, just put anything down. You have, 40 minutes to do this. And don't worry about it, just draw something that looks like a horse, that you think looks like a horse. And so anyway, after that 40 minutes, I said, okay, everybody give me your paper. And I put it all around the classroom, and I says, okay, which is the best horse? And of course, everybody points to the horse that was the most realistic. And so I complimented the person, because they need to be complimented. They've worked a long time figuring out how to draw a horse. But then I says, but look at the other ones, how the unique fact about every single thing up here is that they're all different. They're all unique. And I want each of you to understand that is from you. If you take a math class, you have to have the right answer. If you take a history class, you have to have the right date. But when you do art, it's just what comes from your heart and what you do. And it just so happened I had a couple of props with me, and one of them was a Salvador Dali prop, and it was of a painting, a picture of a painting with a horse with stilt-like legs that were really skinny and long, and the horse was way up there in the sky, up there. And then I showed him another picture of Guernica by Picasso, and how it was all twisted around and how it looked. So anyway, we had kind of a nice discussion about that. And so when I went back to school, my dad contacted me, and he says, ever since you've been here, my kids can't wait till art class. And they all dive in it, they all do the, work on it. They've all kind of felt like they've discovered something. But I'm kind of like a little disappointed when I see the education in the United States. And, I traveled Europe for a while. And it seems like their idols, a lot of their idols are like Picasso and I guess, like Michelangelo and, all the famous, masters that have lived in Europe. And here it's Daniel Boone and Abraham Lincoln. And so it's kind of like I kind of wish it was kind of like something that was encouraged more, or maybe demanded more by our educational system. But I had a friend in San Diego who I actually, he wasn't really an artist, but he was pretty well to do, and he had a house, and he bought one of my paintings, and he put it like in his back room, in his bedroom. But I walked into his house, and he actually bought the painting not because he wanted to buy the painting, but it's because he knew me. And he wanted to get a piece of my work, because I used to work with him at the fine art store before that. And so anyway, I walked in, I had dinner, and I noticed in their living room there was like nothing on the walls at all. And so I said, I looked at it, and they basically said, well, we don't like it here that much. It's, we're thinking about moving to another place, and it's kind of depressing here. And I said, well, I'm working on a painting that if I can bring that over here and just get out of my sight for just like about a month, then maybe I could figure out what to do with it, so I'll come back and pick it up after a month. And he says, oh, that'd be great. So I did that and dropped the painting off, and then when I left it there, and when I came back, I picked it up, had dinner ready for me, and it was fun talking to him again. And so I think I'm moving this thing around. So anyway, when I came back to pick up the painting, well, I picked up the painting, and when I came back the next time, his living room was completely covered with art. And with not just art, but with hangings and with posters and with, fabric things. But it's kind of like they were going, wow, something, we decided we're going to stay here. We didn't realize that what our surroundings meant, or what, how important it was to do something like this with our environment. But it's also something that when you're working with your art, it's someone who works with it all the time is always sees more and more and more. And maybe a good example of that is at San Diego at the Fine Art Museum. When I walked in, there was a painting of a figure. It was really tall, it was really big, really well done, to where I was just amazed when I saw it. And it was a 17th century woman that was on a hillside with some sheep in the background, and I thought how beautiful that painting looked. And so 5 years later, I visited it again after painting in my studio for as long as I did, and when I looked at it, I saw things that I never ever realized were there 5 years earlier. And 5 years later, after that, I looked at it again, and again I saw things that I never saw the 5 years earlier. And it's all because I was working every single day on paintings. And so I don't know how, and I have a lot more to say to you, but I think I'm going to move on and kind of show you in the progression of a painting when I do it, and you can kind of see what I mean by the background. And then I have about 4 or 5 sections, and maybe in between each one I can talk for like 5 minutes, and it'll be kind of interesting. But so this sketch basically is done in, I would say, probably 15 minutes. Just it's basically sketching it out. And a lot of people who see my work say, hey, I like it how it was when you first started, after the first half hour, the first 15 minutes. But you can kind of see, and when you get close to it, you can actually see the textures that I work with, and also with the gessos and stuff like that. And, but I don't really use gesso anymore. I found that I like to use a really strong base, and it cracks, if you use too much. And this is actually, I used to do it like the old masters, and I would paint it with a rabbit skin glue. The canvas. I stressed my own canvases, and I would paint it with rabbit skin glue, and after that dried, I'd cover it with a lead primer. And now they don't have lead primers anymore. I think they've been outlawed, and so I use a titanium white primer. And it's not really the regular paint titanium white. It's mixed with, I think, linseed oils and other things that make it a more sturdy and flexible primer than what gesso is. And so that's basically the finish of that. This is I decided to go do a series at Hood Canal Bridge. This painting is out in the bistro. If you can see the finished product. So, but again, you can see, the background that I use, or that splattered background. Again, this I did the first part in 15 minutes. So this is so like I said, as far as a gesture is concerned, learning how to draw a figure really fast, that's how I like to start even in a landscape. It's just to sketch it out as quick as I can. Okay, so that's kind of like a real quick step-by-step, not real step-by-step, but you can kind of, I've been, take a photograph of it every, throughout different stages, and so it's kind of interesting. But anyway, when I did go to San Diego, I ran into a very interesting situation, and that's where I was, I started at the fine art store, and rather than being an artist that looks for grants, again, like I, talked about earlier, or wants to figure out how to get into a gallery. I just wanted to be left alone and work in a studio, and I wanted to show my stuff, of course, but that was fine with me, to do that. And so when I started working for the fine art store, I thought that, well, to support my art, why don't I just get jobs in art on the side? So I worked for an art store, and then I delivered art supplies to everybody in San Diego. It was the museum, the museums, the galleries. I'd pick it up to have them pieces to have them framed and then drop them off. And then I would actually go to the illustrators of all the the Navy and Marine bases who were like designing jets and ships, and I would go to universities, and I would go to illustrated places where the illustrators worked, and I got to know them personally. And it was so to me, even though I wasn't working, I was actually learning about art and about what art was in the community. And so anyway, it was really a learning experience for me. And I had a really strange event happen, and that's that the owner, his name was Javier Romano. He was a graduate of the Art Institute of Chicago, and he decided to have the largest art supply store and picture framing shop in Southern California. And so he called me into his office, and he said, "Well, Paul, I'm going to lay you off." And I said, "Oh," I says, "I need this job." And he goes, I says, "Plus, I love all the people that I met here," because he had this thing about hiring people that had art degrees that couldn't get jobs. So that was he found a lot. So anyway, he says, "Well, let me tell you the circumstances here." He says, "I have a best friend who just passed away, and he built the most beautiful studio 2 blocks up from the beach in Pacific Beach, and his widow does not want anybody to use that unless it's an artist. And so I'm going to lay you off so you could go offer her $100 a month for this studio." And he says, I'm going to get you unemployment for a year, and then you come back after that year, and I'll hire you back again. And so I walked into the studio, and it had probably 300 or 400 books on one wall. It had drawers full of oil paints. It had palette knives. It had brushes. It had everything, but it didn't have a shower. And I found that out with a lot of my studios. Instead of getting a house, for me, the priority was to get a studio. And so I would find some place to work and throw my bed in it. And, like later on, it was a ballroom. I found a ballroom in the gas lamp area for $200 a month. And I was doing like 14-foot paintings and life-size drawings. And you go to the fire escape and look down on the street. At that time, it was in the 70s. And there were like probably... it was basically packed with sailors and hookers and drug dealers, and you could actually watch the action from above, from 3 stories high, and see what was going on. But the thing about it is the property owners. It was a beautiful part of San Diego. The gas lamp was, and all the beautiful buildings of when San Diego started, and it was kind of a shame that it got into such a seedy situation. But the owners couldn't get anybody to rent. The codes to the buildings weren't built to a point to where they could actually rent them out. And so they purposely rented to artists. And the word got out, and artists from New York and San Francisco, from the area. In fact, Whoopi Goldberg was down there at the time doing theater. But the whole street was packed with artists. But the funny thing about it was the street people liked it as well. And so they would actually call us by name, and they were just really friendly, and we had nothing to fear with it. I mean, there was one time I was walking down the street in the evening, and 2 huge African American males were like walking toward me, and one of them grabbed me by the right here by the collar and dragged me. I mean, I was way too small compared to him to resist, but he pulled me between the 2 cars off the sidewalk. And by the time he got me there, his friend had grabbed him by the back of the collar and pulled him off and said, "Leave him alone. He's one of the artists." And he goes, "Whoops, sorry." And he backs off and left. But it's kind of, there was something, about the landowners, and there's something about the street people, and there's something about the artists that I always wished that I could have been in Paris during the Impressionistic time, or been in New York during the abstract expressionist time, and I thought, boy, I really missed out on it. But you know what I realized is that 10 years in the gas lamp was exactly the same, it just didn't get the publicity. And we would meet at at a bar and for a happy hour and have a beer and probably some tacos, free tacos. Then we'd go to one of the artist studios and we'd discuss his work, his or her work. And then another time they'd come to my studio, and then there was a great camaraderie. There was a lot of performance art. I don't know how much everybody here knows that much about performance art, but Diamanda Galas was raised in San Diego, and she's from New York. She actually really made it in New York, and she's done a lot of CDs, but it's a real avant-garde, almost kind of a screeching type of of a sound, but she became very famous in New York and in Europe. And her brother was a performing artist that was in San Diego at the time, and he used the stage in the ballroom to actually to perform in, and I let him use it for free. So everybody just helped each other out, and it was a wonderful, wonderful situation. So, but again, when I'd like to move back a little bit on like how to the importance of really learning about art and actually being able to see art. I mean, I've tried different analogies. I mean, one of them might be looking at the Olympics, going, wow, look at those beautiful mountains. And there could be a friend of yours that would go, yeah, I love those mountains. But this particular person that was talking about it had gone there. He actually went there and he saw the lakes and the streams and the snow-capped mountains and saw the wildlife and went fishing up there and went camping up there. And so when he looked at the mountains, he saw a completely different thing. And so what I'm trying to say is that people who really delve into the arts, I mean, you're well rewarded. I mean, it's something that enriches your life probably more than you could ever realize it. But a lot of people don't get that opportunity or don't think it is that important to do. But it really is. I mean, the more you can understand art, the more it will enrich your lives. And I used to read novels all the time. I'd always pick a different artist to read a biography. And once I was finished, I'd go, okay, what's another artist I don't know anything about? And I'd read another one. I think I started with Lust for Life when I was back in high school. But as a result, by doing that, I've learned a lot about different artists because, it's been, like 50 years, 60 years since, I was reading about them. And so that kind of adds up on the things that you learn if you're focused on something. Okay, I'm going to continue. This is when I was in San Diego. And so, again, you can see the background, how I used the background on this. And then here's one where I ended up completely covering the background just because I got so into the palette knife and into what I was working on. So this was all done in the 70s. But again, I couldn't help myself. I couldn't do anything consistent. I had to let me try something abstract now. And so I would just play around and, see what I could come with. I would start a painting and see how I could finish it. It became a challenge to see what I could do with it. I'd purposely sometimes make a mess and then see how I could fix it. This was actually about 14 feet long. And again, you can see some of the background, how I used it. Okay, what's going on here? I lost something here. Okay, but anyway, that experience was pretty good. And so I eventually, after traveling around Europe, I decided to move up to Seattle, which I did. And I did the same thing.
Sorry.
Okay. I did the same thing as I went to Pioneer Square, and I got an amazing studio, and I got a side job working behind Davidson Gallery, as a picture framer. And so here I am again with a studio that was probably on Occidental and Jackson, that was probably half a block away from the place that I worked. And the place where I worked, I got to really get to know, the artists that we were framing for, and the artists that we got to know them personally. There was even a situation where when the wall came down in Germany, we received a huge order to frame, and it was Russian artists. And the paintings themselves were really large, but they were really dark and depressing. But they were also rolled up, and so we didn't get them as framed paintings, so I had to do all the framing for them. And you know, when I looked at them, I spread them out, and I really realized that none of them were square. So I had to figure out, you know, how I was going to not damage the paintings and like keep it whole without actually cutting them. So I would build a stretcher bar, and some of them were like 5, 6 feet. Okay, some of them were like 5 or 6 feet. Let me see if this. Nope. But they, you know, it might stick out like maybe a half a foot, or once I think one stuck out a full foot. But what I would do is I would just sand that corner a little bit more, and I would get a thin piece of acid-free paper and wrap around that, and then I would wrap, you know, the canvas around it, and I would, you know, attach it on the back, and then the frame would like fit on square. And so it was really a fun experience. But another odd thing that has happened with me that when I talk about doing art jobs on the side is when I was in my ballroom studio, there was an old friend of mine that used to work at the fine art store that showed up that had an art director's job at this company called Robert Keith and Company. And so this particular company was made giant inflatable sculpture. But so when he came to one of my openings, he said, "Hey, we're looking for a sculptor to come over and do do some sculpture that we can make balloons out of." And I was kind of laughed. It's like, yeah, right, like those little, you know, like tie balloons or whatever. And he says, "Well, come visit us and you can see what it's like." And I said, "Okay," and I didn't go. So 2 weeks later, he called and he says, "You know, at least you got to come over here and see me, and we'll visit, we'll have lunch, and I'll meet you, you know, introduce you to everybody." So I did. And it turned out that they were making a giant, 70-foot giant inflatable King Kong to put on the Empire State Building. And so I got to do the clay for that and help build that. But that led to some other things, and we were doing things for like expos and for Super Bowls and a lot of other odd stuff. But again, I had my studio that I was living in, so I could always walk away and leave it and go back and paint. But when I finally came to the Seattle area, there's a couple of things I wanted to try and try to make, and it was that I was a little restricted because the things that I made in San Diego that were inflatable were stuff that clients wanted, or the people who owned the business wanted, and it was stuff that I had to make for them, which I wasn't used to that kind of thing. I'm used to, as a painter, I'm used to painting what I want to paint. And so anyway, I made a couple of things, and anybody that lives in the Bainbridge Island area might be familiar with some of these things, because I started making things that I kind of wanted to make. And one of them is I wanted to make a bald-headed eagle. Because we made a bald-headed eagle back in Southern California, and by the time I made a beautiful clay sculpture to make one, but they said, "Oh, the client can't afford that. Make it simpler." And so they finally took a pattern that I did earlier of a pigeon and painted it to look like an eagle. And to me, it was kind of like So I came here, and when I was in Pioneer Square, I found a guy who made parachutes, and I says, "Hey, I'll teach you how to make inflatables if I can make this eagle." And he goes, "Okay." So he did that, and so anyway, that eagle actually graced the streets of Winslow for 10 years at 4th of July. They always, paid me like $500 to bring that in and inflate it. I don't know if anybody here remembers that or has seen it. And there was also Kilroy, who I did in Paulsbo, who, when the Central Market opened, had a big nose and a hand that kind of looked over the edge. And then there was a dinosaur that I made that I shared with the schools in the system, even the Bainbridge Island schools and the Suquamish schools. Where I'd invite the classes to come over and check out this huge dinosaur that I made. But this kind of snowballed. And so the next thing I know, I was asked to do like some inflatable characters for PlayStation, like I did Lara Croft and I did Crash Bandicoot, and it was for a big show in the LA area. And so then there was someone at Nordstrom's when they opened up the new Nordstrom stores that wanted to put 2 or 3 55-foot legs like they were sitting on top of the Nordstrom building. So I made that. And then Macy's saw it, and so I ended up making 50 Macy floats for, 25 for Portland and 25 for Seattle. And so it's like it was snowballing. Then I started doing theater work in New York, and so I did stuff for Radio City, and I did there's a place called Troika Entertainment who does all the Broadway shows. When they're finished, they put them on tour. And so he was in charge of doing that, and he had me make a set for the Broadway production of Cats. And I made a full-size set, and it turned out to be an exact duplicate that you couldn't even tell the difference between the real one or my inflatable set. And as a result, it usually would take, I would say, 50 people to set up the Cat set, and it would take them like a week and a half to 2 weeks to do it wherever they went. And there were only certain theaters that were capable of showing this set. So thank you. Anyway, it ended up they were able to actually do one-man shows, with this set, and so it made them millions. They just really did. The actual show, the original show took something like 7 semi-trucks, 53-foot trucks, and plus taking that amount of time. And so with the set that I made, they put it in a half-size U-Haul, and it took only 2 or 3 people to put it up in one day. And so anyway, it lasted 10 years, and finally it was the longest-running musical, I think, in history. And when they were done with it, I think they used my set for like 10 years, and they contacted me and said that it was still in the same condition as when I made it, and it made them millions of dollars. And he says, by the way, the money we paid you for that? And I says, yeah. And he goes, that was my money. He says, no one else wanted to do it. They didn't believe it could happen. And he says, so I went ahead and used my own money to have this made. And so anyway, it was kind of an exciting time for me to do this and to make this, but it was something that I was really anxious to get back to my painting. And so I finally worked my way out of it. And I think the economic problems of the 80s kind of helped a little bit. So no, it wasn't the 80s, like 2008. And so I kind of started backing off on it. And then finally I retired and sold my shops, and I got a beautiful property like in about 2001. And the reason I was able to get that property was because of doing these inflatables. And so it gave me the opportunity, by doing the inflatables, also to raise my daughters. It also gave me the opportunity to buy a house. And so I found this great property with a view of the Olympics, and it had a barn in it. It was an old barn. In fact, my daughter at the time when we moved in was 5 years old, and she ran in and fell through the floor. And then in the roof, there was no roof at all. And I thought, well, I could tear this down, or maybe I could do something with it. So I ended up making a studio. So I made my ideal studio out of that barn, which is what I used right now. And anyway, I'm going to go ahead and continue with this. This is some more stuff that I did in San Diego. This is on Masonite. So I used to just always do stuff on Masonite. And this particular one, you can actually see how I loved rocks, so you can see how I just really got obsessed with making rocks. But when I left Wyoming and went to San Diego, I realized that all of a sudden I had this patience I never realized I was capable of. I think it's because being born and raised in Wyoming, and having no outlet for art, and having being knowing the same people and getting in the same habits and same routines. When I moved to San Diego, it was all of a sudden there was, it's like I could make my own habits. I could make my own, I could put my energy towards things that I wanted to put it in, and I wasn't holding on to like little problems or whatever that I had with other people or with other things or with the whole environment, the families and the people you like, people you didn't like, people that just really made you kind of become like a pile of mush, basically mind-wise. And so when I went to San Diego, I became all of a sudden I had a completely clear mind, and when I sat down, it felt like I could paint anything. In fact, every painting I did turned out much better than I ever imagined it could, and it showed when I started putting stuff out. It was easily and quickly accepted, and a lot of people bought my stuff. This is that ballroom studio, the corner of the ballroom studio on the stage, and so that's about 5 feet high. I did some street paintings, and I actually used a palette knife, on that one. And again, I ended up completely covering the background. Okay, here's that corner again with another chair, and then there's the streets with the like I say, the hookers and the drug dealers and stuff like that. And these were actually pretty large. And here's an idea of a figure. So anyway, this took me 4 seconds to do. Right? So I just did a quick one and took a picture of it and had it put up here. And it's it gives you an idea of the motion you can get, even though every figure has a completely different mood or motion or whatever. And if you can capture that just in seconds, then you can go back and you can start working on the contour, you can start working on the shading, you can start working on other aspects of it. And so here's one that's carried up to about 15 or 20 minutes. And again, when you do as much figure drawing as I have, I've thrown tablets away just because they piled up so much, or I've had so many rolls of them that I would maybe go through them and pick a couple of pieces I liked and I throw the rest away just because I had too much of a mass, quantity of them. So again, it's important to draw, and these actually I've done recently because I'm not working for the figure right now, and so I thought, well, maybe I'll take some old figure drawings and do some little paintings of them. Okay, now this is a series that I'm going to show you that I think I better run through this relatively quick here, but it's my pipe series. And everybody goes, well, what's that pipe for? Why are you putting these pipes in this thing? And to me, when I talk about Jungian psychology and about the symbols of mankind and about dreams and all that kind of stuff, I kind of developed my own symbol and it's called a pipe. And what is it? And so it's kind of like it's like conduit. It's almost a structural thing, and it's also transfers fluids or gases. It could be even like compared to maybe the veins in your body, how it transfers your blood. Or it could be, a lot of other different things that this if you guys ever want to see this real one, it's in Roby King Gallery right now. And so actually, if you want to see some more of my work other than what's here, I would recommend you go check them out because they have some good work there. So again, I don't exactly know what a lot of these mean, but when you talk about dreams, when you have a dream, you can't control the dream. Maybe some people say they can control the dream, but in general, you can't. And so have you ever had a dream where all of a sudden something was going on? Let's say you were in a car driving somewhere, and the next thing you know, there's you're in a den with a wildcat or something. How did I get from driving a car to being in a den with a wildcat? It's like, what's going on? So anyway, that's what I showed you, that original base painting that I did. You could sit there and look into that painting and you can see things, and it becomes almost like a Rorschach test. And so when I see an image, I'll just emphasize it. I'll go ahead and put it there. Anyway, even though I have another idea in mind on what painting I want to do, so what I do is I mix that painting with whatever I see on that ground or that image. So I probably have done about 30 paintings with pipes. And then there's my strata, and it's my strata paintings is something that when I was in science class, when I paint, I have to enjoy what I'm painting. I can't just force myself to do a series. I have to have fun. And so when I was in junior high or high school, it's like my favorite thing about science class was to see these cross sections, of the Earth or of the moon, if they don't really know what it looks like, but it's kind of like, or of different things that they were showing that were underneath the Earth. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to use that under the Earth thing to kind of emphasize not just fantasy things that could be underground, but also the depth of your mind and how your mind is. And so here's an interesting one that a person bought that he liked it so much. It was a fairly large painting, but he liked it so much. There's a knock on my door a couple of weeks later, and he had 500 lithos, photolithos, and 500 posters made of it, because he said he didn't want to hog the image. But he knew that it was my image, so he gave them all to me, and he says, why don't you, do what you want with these. And I still have hundreds of them in my house. I don't know what to do with them all. And here you have, you can see Mario down here, and here he is up in the real world. Well, this thing's moving along. But you can kind of see the ideas I came up with, and again, that they were really a lot of fun to do. I named this Masters of War, so the musical notes on the bottom it's a Bob Dylan song called Masters of War. And this one is here in the museum. This one's called Harvesting Eggs, and that's why I have a bunch of women, because a bunch of men down there harvesting eggs wouldn't really work. And so this is a painting called Frontier, and it sold almost immediately when I did it. And it's about 6.5 feet tall. And then here's one that's here in the museum, as well as this. And so again, you can kind of see a lot of the symbolic value of it. And here's some of my new work. And when I say I was impressed mainly by the Impressionists and by Surrealism. And so this is my painting kind of depicting Surrealism going into Impressionism. And then this is another Dylan song, Blowing in the Wind. It's named it The Answer, My Friend. And then here's another one that you'll find at the Roby King Gallery. And it's another one of those things where I have no idea why I painted it, but I just kept seeing these images in it, and I went ahead and just painted it. There's some in the bistro. There's a view from under the bridge, from the Hood Canal Bridge. And this is from under the bridge. And that one is also out here. And it's named, the name of this is Cloud Hiding UFO. There's my porch and my view. It's called Moon Setting at Sunrise. And this is the one I wanted to end with, just because it's, even though it's a little macabre, it's a little bit, there's something that's comforting about it and really earthy, about that. And so, anyway, I talked your ear off, and actually I didn't even cover half the stuff I wanted to talk about. And, so right now I'd like to just ask if anybody has any questions or anything that they're curious about. again, we can always go out and have some refreshments and enjoy ourselves, and we can talk out there. So, does that work? See you all out there.